Hey everyone, welcome to the next part of my top 5 games of 2017 list video, in which I discuss my 4th favorite game of the year. If you're new, I highly recommend you check out the first video on this topic, where I cover all my concerns and criteria which inform how this list is structured. The simplified summary that everyone uses when doing these videos is that this is all obviously subjective, and your list will be different to mine because we all think differently and like different things. All of what I say about a game is based solely on my experience with that game when I played it, and I obviously also cannot account for every update and patch and that sort of thing. I also haven't played every game in 2017. There are some great games that I have yet to insert delicately into my console or PC. Boot up on my gaming system device thing. Just games there's a lot I haven't played. That's the gist of the disclaimer, but I'd still appreciate it if you gave the first video in this series a look before proceeding for a more comprehensive understanding of my approach. Anyway, my 4th favorite game of 2017 is...
You ready? Let's get this freak show on the road.
Oh, Wolfenstein 2. Although I really like this game, I think I convinced myself that it's better than it is while I was playing it. But now the honeymoon phase is over, and I can admit it's certainly not bad by any stretch. Otherwise, why would it be here? But upon further inspection, I do believe Wolfenstein 2 suffers, in spite of a few interesting new ideas it attempts to implement primarily in its gameplay. On the one hand, the new Colossus tells a very compelling personal story, this time focused more on protagonist William J. Blazkowicz, while continuing to develop and expand on a delightful, colorful, quirky, but grounded cast of side characters, and ensuring you have the utmost hatred for its borderline comic book villains. It can be sad, funny, silly, cheesy, and ultimately also quite powerful. The game juggles seriousness and preposterousness constantly, maintaining a sense of self-awareness throughout, which, in my eyes, kind of excuses the fact that it struggles to mesh its tones as well as it could from time to time. It goes to some crazy, bonkers, and heart-wrenching places that I didn't see coming, even after the New Order. The story is my favorite aspect of Wolfenstein 2. As before, Machine Games just knows how to inject style and substance into a shooter, both in gameplay and in their cutscenes.
Ugh, what in the world the fuck is this shit?
Old Horton Special.
Oh, goddamn.
Now listen, Terror-Billy, I respect your ambition, but there's nothing can be done no more. The world has sank into the crapper, and all we can do now is drink this whiskey and watch the vortex suck it all down.
Didn't expect your belly to be quite so yellow.
We've been fighting for a revolution since long before them Nazis came here. We were the first to start building a civil rights movement to advocate equality for everyone. You know the concept of civil rights, Terror-Billy? No, you don't. You're just a jarhead, ain't you?
Buddy, I laid my life on the line for freedom, justice, and the American way, while you and your bohemian friends were passing out Bolshevik propaganda and opposing the draft on every street corner. What good is your fucking equality? You can't muster the backbone to stick up for your people while the coyote's scratching at your front door.
The cutscenes here are so entertaining and well directed and edited. And unlike usual, I can look past my pet peeve and nitpick concerning the startling use of color correction and post-production effects that don't always blend too well with the in-game visuals, and which result in a distinct pause between gameplay and pre-rendered cinematic that isn't exactly ideal. The motion capture and voice performances are utterly captivating across the board, obviously assisted by excellent character writing and an equally intense attention to detail with regards to body language. This is some of the best dialogue out of any game I've played to have released in 2017. Perhaps some of the best I've ever seen. And based on a decision you had to make in Wolfenstein 1, which you'll make again in the recap at the very beginning of Wolfenstein 2, you'll be playing through one of two timelines. The overarching plot isn't different, but large portions of cutscenes change based on your choice. For me, this was a huge benefit to the game's replay value, and I was surprised at how much effort was put into both of these paths. It's unfortunate that, at the time which I completed the game, there was no way to increase the cutscene voice volume, as dialogue was often overpowered by the effects and music playing in the background. But considering all this is pre-rendered, it kinda makes sense that you can't, and overall this is also a petty nitpick. Speaking of music, Mick Gordon does a great job as usual. I don't know why I haven't yet made some of the combat tracks from the game my ringtone and, more importantly, my alarm. Waking up to this level of awesomeness would have me pumped to start each day. If I had to find something to complain about in the music, the emphasis on distortion and sharp electronic effects can occasionally ruin a good track, or at least ruin part of a good track. It has a tendency to reduce the music to noise at times. A similar complaint to what I said about the music in Prey, which is funny because Mick Gordon also composed the soundtrack for that game. With Wolfenstein 2, I think it's more about, personal preference and taste and that sort of thing, obviously. It's less severe here, though, but I digress. The biggest issue with Wolfenstein 2 lies in its gameplay, something which I'm very conflicted by. Even though there are barely any new guns, the ones they have feel really nice to fire, with a new set of smooth reload animations accompanying them. There's a great punch and sense of finesse that comes with shooting in this game, and it's just addictive when it all works. Though it took a bit of getting used to how floaty maneuvering yourself can be at times, due to how things like weapon sway and head bob are affected by the movement speed in what are often cramped and tight environments. There are times when Blazkowicz's body is designed to react according to the environment in a way which can be discombobulating in first person, and which isn't as big an issue in the more open levels. Little things, like when you get close to a wall and your weapons are moved aside so they don't hit it or clip through it, and so that it feels more like you're actually occupying the 3D space. But that intention can, ironically, be mistaken for a lack of connection to your character at the worst of times. A lot of shooters do this, and it's not like it's a deal breaker at all, but I do think it's worth pointing out as I definitely took note of it at first, and it may also take some getting used to on your part. There are a few new gameplay features, including a revamped dual-wielding system which lets you mix and match weapons as you please. It can be rather sticky though, at least on a controller. I haven't played it on PC, so I wouldn't know. It makes switching weapons, dual-wielding, and toggling attachments a more tedious process than it was before. Not to mention, the game doesn't slow down time sufficiently when opening up the weapon wheel, unless you acquire a particular upgrade, which also doesn't help the situation as much as it could. The ability to dual-wield whatever is a neat idea, but it didn't even serve enough of a practical purpose for me. Unless I was in stealth and wanted one silenced weapon and another loud in case I got caught. Otherwise, I'd likely fire both weapons in the same manner, even if one was single fire and the other was automatic, simply because multitasking such a minute thing isn't something my brain, at least, is really equipped for. There's also a point around halfway through the game where you can pick from one of 3 major enhancements to Blazkowicz, depending on the playstyle you wish to prioritize. Some are obviously more useful than others, though. One lets you squish yourself into tight nooks and crannies, often for better stealth. The second lets you run through walls and enemies. That's generally the loud approach. And the third gives you the ability to extend stilts from your legs to reach higher ground. All of these assist in finding alternate pathways through a level. I know there are story reasons in place, but I wish you could have decided between these contraptions earlier on in the game so there would be more time to use them. Nonetheless, they're a nice replay incentive. Though, quick tip, you can actually acquire all of them later on by completing side activities if you want a small taste in the end or post game. Although certainly easier on my second playthrough, this game is freaking hard, even on the Bring It On difficulty, which is recommended for those like me who are at least somewhat experienced and acquainted with shooters. Essentially, it's this game's normal difficulty, and easier than this just feels too easy. But actually, I guess more fun? You can change the difficulty at any point, which helps. But it's not just that it's difficult that's the problem. It isn't a matter of get good. The game's not hard in the satisfying, challenging kind of way, because you're likely to die frequently regardless of the strategy you employ. It's just unfair. The feedback on the damage you're receiving and from where is minimal, and your enemies are far too powerful and often accurate, with mostly hit-scan weaponry that you can't dodge, overwhelming you quickly in numbers after your cover is blown. This is a game where I wish health and armor weren't pickups, that there was some other system in play that was slightly more forgiving. In the ideal world, I would have Wolfenstein adapt or just copy Doom 2016's health system if possible, forcing you to play as aggressively as the game appears to want you to in order to heal, instead of making you frantically run away from enemies looking for tiny glowing boxes. I don't know, I think Doom has ruined me in this regard. Not everything needs to be Doom, and I know I shouldn't have gone into this expecting something like Doom, but if not that game system, I'd even take the boring hide behind cover to heal approach every shooter uses these days. At least that wouldn't be as frustrating and out of your control as it is at the moment. Finding health and armor amidst the chaos is simply impractical. At its worst, it becomes a game of trial and error, as you play once, figure out where all the supplies and commanders are located, die, and then play again and again until you make it through. There's such a heavy emphasis on stealth and killing commanders if you want to make it through alive, and that's something that, if you haven't played the New Order, may surprise you in a game which advertises itself as a chaotic retro shooter with fast walking and running speeds, and which I'll agree doesn't even feel designed well enough to accommodate stealth as a valid playstyle. Wolfenstein had stealth since the very beginning of the franchise, and although just as basic in this as in the New Order, for some reason I just remember it working much better in Wolfenstein 1. Perhaps the enemies were simply less aware and the levels better designed for it. I'd have to go back and see, but I know something just isn't quite right here. It's not that the levels don't have hidden pathways. But because a lot of these places are so maze-like and repetitive in scenery, as I'll cover later, it's difficult interpreting where they lead and how everything is connected so that you may flank and execute enemies efficiently and strategically. If you really want to encourage stealthy play as a necessity to survival, which it seems Wolfenstein 2 is doing based on how screwed you are usually if you mess it up, I think there needs to be more systems to work with, especially when your levels are like they are in this game. I understand the appeal of simplicity in gameplay mechanics, but there's a reason so many first-person games with stealth are the way they are. Unlike a substantial amount of those games, there's nothing here which lets you mark enemies so that you know where they're situated, what their patterns are, and thus gain a better understanding of the area's layout. Aside from the commanders whose positions are direction marked on your HUD, any soldier can spot you and signal the commander to trigger reinforcements though. So I just don't think that's enough. You're also spotted very easily. I don't believe you can get back into stealth once found, and hidden routes are scarce in levels that are already a mess and difficult to read, as I said. Speaking of levels, the ones in this game are rather uninspired, both visually and in terms of design. They're brown, grey, and repetitive, with some of the more post-apocalyptic environments being a nightmare to navigate. There's little to identify amongst the mess of debris that allows you to figure out where you want to or need to go. I kept thinking the levels would get better, would have more personality and be more interesting to traverse, but no, that doesn't really happen. The game is beautiful in terms of graphics though, and it runs exceptionally on the PlayStation 4 considering. The game is very polished on this level, with no noteworthy bugs or glitches. The lighting and particle effects are mesmerizing, and I like the aesthetic when it isn't all about metal and concrete and broken metal and concrete. What can I say? I love the retro future look. This game is also full of little details during and outside of combat that I really appreciate, like tiny bits of rubble falling from bullet holes and blood splattering across the environment when you kill someone, or like your home base, which, like in the New Order, is beautifully decorated to tell little stories about each of its inhabitants who will occasionally talk at you and ask you to do certain things for them. Yeah, the player NPC interactions outside of combat aren't as great as, they could be, but it's Wolfenstein, so what do you expect? They give you background info and liven up the place to an extent. I mean, it kind of feels a bit like a museum, but, it's still a nice touch. Continuing the pros list, have you felt the throwing axe, and more importantly, these melee kill animations? They are some of the most buttery smooth I've witnessed in a game. They're quick, crunchy, and visceral, briefly taking control from you before you have time to realize and injecting a whole bunch of adrenaline in exchange. And there's rarely any confusion as to what's going on in all this destruction. It's a little thing. I mean, all of these things are little things, but there's also no easily noticeable point where the animation ends and your enemy jumps into ragdoll, or when entering and exiting the animation feels particularly sticky. And what's more is that they never got repetitive for me here. I still have so much that I don't like about Wolfenstein 2 though, and it would appear that for everything I like, there's two things I don't, which I can't help but bring up. Why do you have half health for such a significant portion of the game? You could overcharge your armor to 200 without it depleting over time though, so I guess that helps you take more damage than you'd initially think, and I get that it serves the story for things to be this way. This is definitely set up as the low point for the good guys, in a trilogy, and Blazkowicz wasn't exactly left in tip-top shape at the end of the New Order. I'm guessing they've taken this whole health thing into account and made the enemies less powerful and such for the first half of the game, but I can't confirm this, and at the very least I didn't feel like the opening hours of the game were as forgiving as they should have been. Not that it necessarily gets much easier after things are back to normal, but I will say that a relatively early battle in a courthouse was a particularly frustrating encounter, probably the most challenging in the game, aside from the final battle, which I'll touch on later. This game just fluctuates in difficulty very haphazardly, and I'm not sure if the fact that you start with half health actually makes the game objectively harder. I can only speak from my experience, and in my experience I felt I was dying a lot at the start when I should have been given some more leeway to understand the game and get used to the way that it played. They now allow you to just walk over certain supplies in order to collect them, instead of unnecessarily mashing square to suck up things like before. But the pickup radius is so small, and supplies are often obscured and placed on shelves and such, so that you'll still be mashing square to nab them anyway. It can really grind what is supposed to be a great power fantasy down to a halt before you're likely shot and killed and left frustrated. I guess it's okay in stealth, but I still maintain that health needs to be bigger and more exposed, and you need a larger pickup radius. Furthermore, why don't you pick up the Enigma codes you get from killing commandos automatically? Even though the radius is small, it'd help. Why are the side missions outside of your home base all basically the same and in reused environments? They're side missions, quote-unquote extras, so I guess that's okay. But what's with the pointless decryption minigame that allows you to access those side missions? I already fought for and hopefully collected the Enigma codes, and it's just annoying losing them in this minigame when there isn't even any satisfaction when I actually decode them. But you're probably not going to screw it up though, so there's really no reason to include this tedious process. Why does the final battle in this game throw a whole bunch of the same guys at you over and over again, and then ruthlessly chuck bigger versions of the usual big guys into the pool at last minute that will rip your shit up? Why is there rarely, if ever, a good boss fight in these games? I guess shooters generally struggle with that sort of thing, but throwing strong bullet sponges at you also isn't a resolution to this problem. Quick tip: use the manual save feature as frequently as possible. If you're like me and can't lower the difficulty partly out of some stupid sense of pride, and because maybe the game is just too easy on an easier difficulty. It took me a while to realize that this was a valid option, and that I didn't need to trial and error my way through the whole final onslaught again and again until I eventually killed everything in one go. Including this feature doesn't excuse the difficulty spikes and redeem Wolf 2 in this regard. You just gotta do what you gotta do. Why is the end credit song so cringeworthy and tone deaf? No pun intended. Why don't we get to see more of the civilian world ruled by the Nazis, and why don't we get to fight through any more environments as exciting as this? Nazi-occupied Earth would be a pretty bleak place, so I understand all the concrete and grey and misery, but this level shows you that there can at least be some colourful set dressing in this game. Playing through more places like this would have been so much more interesting than the grey military bases we got. Why are the weapon upgrades here so standard? And as I mentioned before, why are there barely any new guns? Okay, they've changed them slightly, but why? 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 Okay, I'm being a bit dramatic, but it seems like overall, Wolfenstein 2 takes a few steps back rather than forward, or at least it doesn't expand or improve on very much. So many little decisions and shortcomings that take away from what otherwise could have been one of my top 2 games of the year, and yet I still really love this game. I'm even trying to platinum it for some reason, nabbing all the little collectibles while I put off playing the game on a tougher difficulty. And I don't usually even care about trophies, so it takes something special to encourage me to do that. Something that has a gameplay loop that is enjoyable, and it is enjoyable in Wolfenstein 2. The shooting and melee combat is just so satisfying when it all works, enough to get me through the ruthless, frustrating, unbalanced normal difficulty that diminishes ever so slightly as you acquire more upgrades. But it's really the story that saves Wolfenstein 2. Even that isn't perfect, but it has enough amazing moments to elevate this game to one of the best of the year for me, in spite of its shortcomings. I laughed out loud and teared up a couple times, and although I expected a good story from a sequel to the unexpectedly great narrative contained in The New Order, I was still surprised by how much a game about brutally killing Nazis in a far-fetched, dystopian, alternate history Earth could touch me emotionally. Hopefully Wolfenstein 2 did well enough financially to warrant a sequel, because I desperately want to see what they do next and how the story concludes itself. And that concludes the second video on my top 5 games of 2017. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd like to know what your 4th favorite game of the year is, and why. I'd be more interested to hear where Wolfenstein 2 fits on your list if you've played it. For me, it was a toss-up between this game and Prey. I think overall I just had a better time with this one because I didn't approach it with the intention of reviewing it, and although it often grew frustrating, and I'm not sure I could argue with you if you said Prey was the better designed game overall, I just didn't have the same pressure to keep pushing through here and could just take my time with it. Although it definitely struggles in some areas, The New Colossus is a game where you can feel the passion and care put into it by the team at Machine Games. Like all the games on this list, Wolfenstein 2 is such a genuine and authentic experience, in spite of its design missteps. And that's something you simply can't say about most AAA shooters these days. And it's a single-player shooter, which, according to some companies, is just something that shouldn't be. Anyway, thank you for watching this long video. I hope you enjoy your day, and I will see you all in the next part.